Welcome back to another episode of Movement is a Lifestyle. I'm your host, Ben Reuter. The purpose of Movement is a Lifestyle is to interview people in the South Hills area and across the Pittsburgh region who understand the importance of movement, not just for exercise, but also for quality of life and wellness. We have a repeat guest, probably 3 or 4 times, maybe more today. We have Kelly Kuhn, who is a physical therapist and the owner of Kelly Kuhn Physical Therapy. But she is also an active youth sport advocate because she has 2 girls who play many sports. One of them locally plays, I think she said before we started recording, 5 different sports, and we'll talk about why that is versus specializing in one. And Kelly's here because she has gotten involved with a project through the Aspen Institute out in Aspen, Colorado, that is called Project Play. Kelly, thank you for taking time to join Movement is a Lifestyle.
Thanks for having me again.
I guess the first question would be, for people who aren't familiar with it, I was familiar with it just because of people I know. What is Project Play?
So Project Play is an initiative by the Aspen Institute Sports and Society section to try to re-examine youth sports and get more kids back into sports. So we have about 70% of kids dropping out of sports by the age of 11. And at the high school level, only about 20% of kids, 23% of kids total are getting the physical activity requirements. Only 15% of girls are getting the physical activity requirements, and they're not learning physical literacy to be active throughout their lifespan. So it has some pretty big consequences for us. So the Aspen Institute was, Sports and Society section was founded by Tom Farrey, who is a former ESPN investigative reporter, to try to tackle some of these issues and see if we can make some changes.
And I would imagine one of the things that happens when you get dropping out or not being able to play in youth sports because coaches and parents say you're not good enough, less activity, as you said, in high school, and then activity or movement becomes abnormal, and I'll probably get the statistics wrong, but we've got over 70% of the US population who are adults who don't meet the minimum requirements, and it has huge health aspects.
Yes, and if we know if we don't develop physical literacy, which isn't just the ability to be active, but it's also the desire and confidence to be active by the age of 12, it makes it very hard for adults to then be as those kids to be active adults and to stay healthy throughout their lifespan. And right now, the main way that, because kids really don't play outside anymore, for kids to learn physical literacy is to participate in sports. So it's very important that we get more kids doing it.
I know you're a University of Florida graduate, so you probably won't like this anecdote, but I seem to recall Nick Saban from the University of Alabama talking about how the majority of his players were multi-sport athletes in high school, and that potentially has the ability to make them more athletic.
Yes, so some sports are what we call donor sports for other sports. So you for example, baseball and softball, you might learn more rotational power, which might then help you jump higher in basketball. And so each sport gives you a different skill, helps you to develop physical literacy in a different way. It also gives you a break from that sport. It gives you a chance to learn to move and learn that physical literacy by being exposed to a lot of different scenarios and help you with decision making in sports. So we know playing, and also, I mean, as a physical therapist, we know it greatly cuts down on the injury risk. Specifically, the bigger injuries, you know, the ACLs and the things that really take kids out for a long time are cut down significantly if we start to spread out those sports seasons a little bit.
You've mentioned a couple times physical literacy, and some of our listeners may not be familiar with it. What is physical literacy?
So physical literacy is it's the ability to move. So just knowing your basic movement skills, like being able to balance and knowing how to move your body to complete tasks. But it's also the desire to want to do that, and the ability to do that, and the motivation to do it, the confidence and motivation to do that. And what we're seeing is, you know, kids, we make sports so very adult-like for very young kids, so it's not fun, so they drop out. Then moms will say, oh, they're just not athletic. So already that kid is labeled not athletic. That kid doesn't stand a chance to learn the physical literacy. On the other side of things, we have kids that become so competitive in sports that they develop, like they're playing it year-round, the coaches are screaming at them. It's basically like a job. When the sport is over, that desire to exercise is gone, and they actually don't develop the physical literacy outside of their sports, and they are also faring pretty bad with keeping active lifestyles. So it's kind of on both sides of the equation where we're losing kids to stay healthy later in life. So we definitely need to look at it from both sides.
I know you've had a fair amount of experience working as a physical therapist in a clinical setting. If you could think back to when you were working every day in a clinical setting, was it a common occurrence, I won't say a problem, although it may be considered a problem, to have patients who would come in with various injuries and you would try to show them rehabilitative exercises or return to activity exercises, even if they weren't athletes or movers, and they just were not able to do it because they didn't have that physical literacy?
Yeah, so that happens a lot. They just didn't feel confident with it. They didn't have the desire to do it. It seemed too much like work versus like moving for fun. So that's really common for patients not to be able to keep up with exercises because they don't have physical literacy. So it makes it harder for them to recover from the injury.
I know you can probably divide parents into two groups. There are those parents who are always active and they encourage their kids to play sports, even though the parents may not play sports. And a normal activity for the family on a Saturday or a Sunday is maybe they go for a hike or something. And then there's other parents who, well, you know, they want to play basketball, that's fine, but we don't move. Do you see this in your coaching experience, that the children whose parents are more active, I won't say athletic, but just active and movement is a normal aspect of their life, do you find them that they come into the sports that you coach, which you do at a relatively young age, more successful at moving than those children whose parents maybe are not movers?
Yes, we know that kids who have parents who move and are physically active are more likely to be physically active. And then what happens is, just if they're physically active in their early years, they start to already develop some of those movement skills. So when you put them into sports, they tend to perform a little bit better because they've been playing, they've been developing those movement skills just from hiking, climbing on rocks, jumping. And then so they are now labeled the athletes, right? And then there's the kid whose parents just maybe isn't as active, and no judgment, it just is what it is. They haven't had those movement experiences yet, so they're new, but they're now playing with those kids, so they are now labeled the non-athlete. And so we put them together on the same team. It can be a really demeaning experience for one who's got really high skills and one who doesn't. And so they drop out. It's not fun because our coaches and our environment for sports isn't set up to support them both. And this isn't like we're saying we want to go back to the 70s where every kid just played outside. And this is, not like, hey, we want to go back to the participation trophy. That's not the goal here. The goal is just to find, how do we get more kids into sports? So is there something in between participation trophies and, win at all cost club sports that we can get more kids involved into? And are there little steps we can take to not lose that kid who's not great at 5,
And you mentioned some statistics earlier about the number of children or kids who drop out of sports by the time they get to certain ages. What are some reasons why children drop out of sports or stop participating before they get to high school?
I mean, there's a myriad of reasons, but obviously the big one is the pressures. We're specializing them earlier. There's, I think the Positive Coach Alliance, which we're working with to bring training to coaches, has brought, I should say my township is working, not the Aspen Institute, but they said they polled college athletes, and overwhelmingly the thing that they least liked about their youth sports experience was the car ride home with their parents. So there's this pressure on kids to play and be, to never make a mistake, which is ridiculous. Even Michael Jordan has a famous quote about making mistakes. We talk about holding kids accountable, but we're not holding them accountable for the right of things. We're holding them accountable to be these perfect athletes. It's not fun. And even our practices aren't set up for fun. They're set up, we focus on fundamentals, which doesn't really actually fit with long-term athletic development. It's not fun. It makes them lesser athletes. So, they're not really having that much fun. They're getting yelled at all the time. It's a lot of work. They never get a break from it. Like, Ryan, would you want to do that? Like, it just isn't fun for a lot of kids, and especially if they're not getting the playing time, or, they're just not enjoying it. And truth be told, the way our practices are set up, most kids aren't even getting the right amount of physical activity because they're so slow. They're standing in line. It's all fundamentals. They don't move much in practice anymore either. So they don't get as much of that high from practice anymore. So we just aren't setting it up right to support what we know supports long-term athletic development, and what supports physical literacy, and what supports keeping kids in the game. We've kind of just gone astray from all that.
And what exactly does the Project Play from the Aspen Institute do? What are the things that you've learned since you've become involved and taken to Bethel Park, where you live? So
they have made a playbook with youth sports, and they based it off of the Children's Bill of Rights in Sports, which is the country of Norway. They adopted it, and when they weren't doing well in sports, and they kind of changed their whole sports culture, and they've won the last 2 Winter Olympics and arguably the most athletic country in the world right now. They far outweigh us when it comes to when you adjust per capita, for the athletes they have. And so they kind of base these playbooks on this Children's Bill of Rights, which are just basic things like children have the right to play sports, they have the right to enjoy it, they have the right to be treated with dignity. And then they put out these playbooks and lots of resources. They've surveyed coaches, they've surveyed parents, they've just done the research on what kids want, what kids don't want. And then these playbooks give suggestions for community leaders, for coaches, for schools. They actually have a school sports playbook on how to try to get kids back, how to bring more sports back to the communities. And so they're excellent resources to get started if somebody wanted to bring it to their own community and start making small changes there.
And you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I believe you're now on the Bethel Park Recreation Board, is that correct?
I am, yes. Mm-hmm.
Was this something, the Aspen Institute and Project Play, was this something you were aware of before you got on the board, or was this something that you how did you find out about it?
I actually found out about it well before I was on the board, even well before I started coaching my daughters, because I worked with athletes. I've always worked with athletes in some way, shape, or form, and I was seeing the change over the years. I mean, I've been at it for 20 years, and I've had specifically athletes come to me from all over the South Hills, with injuries, showing me burnout, I've seen parents follow athletes around the clinic when they're doing exercises, just all over them. And I wanted to know how to change it. So I had been researching it and looking into it, learning more about long-term athletic development. And then, I got into it with my own kids, and I was pretty surprised at how much I really even wasn't aware of yet, because I wasn't in the world. And that's when I started to take what I learned and put it into and get on the rec board and start changing.
And I know you do some coaching of your girls also. Did you become involved with the coaching because you wanted to spend more time with your kids, or because you thought maybe you could do a better job because of your knowledge, and some of the coaches who were going to coach them maybe didn't have the knowledge or the background?
I got into coaching just because I was an athlete and I played sports my whole life. And I also felt like one thing that was real important is I never had really many female coaches. And so for my daughters, I wanted them. That's a big thing. And another reason why we think we don't see as many girls into sports right now is that there's not a lot of women, especially moms, out there coaching. It's all dads. So I wanted them to have the opportunity to see that, hey, mom played, mom can coach, and she can do it, and she does a good job with it, and she had that. So I think I had that confidence that a lot of moms don't have, because I've worked with athletes, because I have my strength and conditioning and my performance enhancement specialist. So I have all this education, so I felt confident. And a lot of other moms who also played sports don't have that confidence, and we'd like to see. That's another thing with coach training. We'd like to see more women. Title IX's been around for 50 years. We all played. We should be out there coaching those girls and some of those boys too.
Maybe somebody's listening and they're getting involved with coaching youth sports because they have the free time and their child wants to play. What are 2 or 3 pieces of advice that you wish somebody had told you when you started coaching, which now you look back and you're like, oh yeah, I should have known that?
I think number one is training. I think all coaches should have some training, which is what we're doing with the Positive Coach Alliance, which is an organization that holds workshops for coaches. Just like I'd say I went to kindergarten, does that mean I should teach kindergarten? Just because you played a sport doesn't necessarily mean you should coach it. And especially because we learned to coach the old school way. We know so much more about athletic development. So learning how to talk to kids, learning what keeps them motivated, I think is really helpful. You can do it in very short courses every year, just to get yourself kind of a little more familiar there. We're making sure we're giving these kids the best experience, a quality experience, so they don't always feel like, especially if you want to keep them in local programs, so they don't feel like they have to flee over to club or quit. And then the other thing would be to really look at how to make everything a game in small-sided games, because we know Rob Gray, who is a human systems engineer who's worked with the Boston Red Sox and all these, he's at Arizona State University. He wrote a book on how we learn to move. And his favorite thing he says is dribbling through cones would be great if there was a sport of dribbling through cones, right? The fundamentals and the way we train skills doesn't translate to a game. We know that it doesn't, leaves out so much of the decision making and the reaction time and all the things that go into learning a skill. So when we put skills into a game, we put it into 2-on-2 or 1-on-1 or something with that, and changes the constraints. If I want to work on passing in basketball, I take out dribbling, right? But we're still playing a game, right? It's more fun. They actually start to get the physical activity requirement in practice. They're not standing in line. They're all playing at the same time. There's still that competitive, kids want to compete. They actually survey kids. They don't care as much about winning, but they do like competing. That was way higher on the list of things that kids enjoy about sports. I think it was 16th, where winning was actually 50th of things that kids really liked about sports. So it gives those components to get a better practice. And you can put in small-sided games and not be as skilled as a coach with the technical stuff and still be as effective. And so I think that's a real helpful tip, to go with small-sided games and to make sure you get some training on how to talk to kids.
I know there's often a lot of kids who excel when they're 7 or 8 years old, and then they become average or even unathletic. Like, if my soccer skills had kept up with my 7 or 8 year old, I probably would have played professional soccer. There was a rapid decay, or there was a rapid increase in the other kids who played with me. What do you do as a coach when you end up coaching a team where there's really a dichotomy of skills? You've got somebody who's just naturally very skilled. Maybe mom was an athlete, dad was an athlete. They always love to move. And you've got another kid who's very enthusiastic about it, but isn't that good at it. And I know sometimes I was that kid, sometimes I was the good kid, and it can get frustrating either way amongst the kids. How, as a coach, can you alleviate that and make sure everybody's having a good time?
I mean, that is one of the great challenges, and it's very, very common. And so you have to find places for kids to win that aren't just scoring. So using some kind of system where you're highlighting effort, because we know too, like when kids are praised for effort versus the outcome, or that they actually show more work, they do better, they put in, they have more motivation, they work harder. So making sure you're praising effort. Oftentimes I always call it my alternative scoring. Like I'll give points for other things. Like if I want to work on, defense more, I'll say you get a point for like keeping the ball out of the paint, right? And so any kid can get a win there. So it's not always your superstar who's getting the win at that point. You're getting wins for the other kids. They're getting their opportunity to show their role, their opportunity to develop and to grow. And then, other things, just feeling like, building that team environment, making sure they're all cheering for each other and working together, and using strategies to do that. Just lots of positive reinforcement. I'm definitely not going to scream at them because they made a mistake, or make them run laps because they made a mistake. I mean, that's the absolute way to do the opposite of what we want. We're going to encourage them and, try to build them up by finding their role and realizing that there's a lot of things that go into scoring a point. It's not just the best shooter. It's a lot of things it takes the team. So if you you recognize those efforts and those other accomplishments, the kid who isn't your best scorer is also going to feel like they were part of the team.
I know I've talked to a number of coaches who are involved with long-term athletic development, and they've made the comment that, there really shouldn't be any specialization in sport until maybe at the youngest 12, and it might be even older than that. At what point as a coach, when somebody's coaching children up to high school, at what point does winning become important? Because in some instances, winning is important, whether we like it or not. So at what age or what level does that become one of the priorities? So
I think that the thing is that winning is always important. It is. It's part of the game. It's what makes sports sport. It's just not win at all cost. And so I think at any level, it should never be win at all costs, right? And at different levels, what that cost is will be different. You'll put more emphasis on it at every level, but at any age, you just have to keep it in perspective. And you also have to learn to lose. That's part of the game. I heard a quote once that said, like to win, tolerate losing, love to play. And that's the goal. So if we can get kids to love to play, part of that love to play is wanting to win. I don't like to lose. Do you like to? Nobody does, right? And so nobody's preaching that. We're not preaching losing. We're not preaching not keeping score. We're not preaching participation trophies. We're saying inevitably you're going to lose. Inevitably, it's what you do when you lose. It's what you do when you make a mistake. Do you have a next play mentality? Do you move on? Those skills are the skills that become life skills that we learn from sports. So the emphasis is, only like 1% of high school athletes will go on to get any kind of scholarship money. And majority of that, like the average is like less than $1,500. I mean, it's just not a lot. So what we're getting out of sports is life skills for adults. So we want to make sure that we're actually teaching those life skills and handling a loss, handling, when you make a mistake, and moving on, and, winning and learning, not winning and losing. But I don't want anybody to think that winning is still important. It's always important. It's always part of the game. You can't play sports if you don't try to win.
You mentioned a statistic which is something similar to what I've heard. 1% of high school athletes ends up playing in college, and that's including Division III where there are no athletic scholarships. And yet you can pull up the local sports report and read about the large number of student athletes who have their own personal coaches, and they play in high school or junior high school, and they play on a travel team, and they play on an AAU team in basketball, which is a type of travel team where they travel all over the country. You were talking to me beforehand, and you told your daughter, I'm not sure how old she is, but you told her she wasn't going to play travel team, but the carrot at the end of the stick was she could play any sport that she wanted, which I'm assuming will promote a love of sport. But what was the decision to say, I don't want her to play on a travel team? And then is this something that this is, mom and dad have said this is forever, or maybe in a few years when she's older, if she shows an aptitude for one particular sport?
I think we'll evaluate as she goes. I mean, it's hard. It's hard. Even knowing all this, it is hard. It was not like I knew right away I wasn't going to let her do the club, but I realized, I know that one, you have to look at these club teams. They're so watered down. They're everywhere, and they want to take your money, right? So I obviously, being a trained coach, being a strength and conditioning specialist, I looked at the credentials of all these coaches, and I was like, what am I paying for? They don't, and then the time, the effort, the fact that she would have to leave some of her other sports. And when I kind of posed it to her that way, she was like, well, I don't want to quit this sport, or I don't want to quit that sport. And so we just, and she's only 12. So, so she's having fun. She's doing all the sports. She held me to it. She's got 5 of them now, because I said if she stayed in the, didn't go all the way to the full club. And we do like the local travel. But we're not doing like full on club. And she likes doing them all. So until she's like, I hate all the other sports, I only want to do this one, we'll keep her there. We'll see what happens in high school. We'll play the game as best we can, but I'm not looking at her to be, my goal for her and my other daughter is not for college, it's for when they are 25 and somebody says, hey, let's go play softball for fun. She goes out and plays, or let's go play a game of flag football, that she has that physical literacy to stay confident, enjoy herself, because it is so important for her overall health and mental. If that takes her through a college path or through high school, that's fine, but that's her journey. It's not mine. I just want her to have it. So we'll see as it goes.
Have you gotten any positive or negative feedback, either you and your husband from other parents, or has she gotten positive or negative feedback from her friends of, I wish I was doing what you were doing, or why aren't you doing what we're doing?
No, nobody's really said anything to us. I think people understand our decision. I think probably privately some people are like, oh, they should put her in club, and there's this fear of missing out in a parent world where, that's, and I just don't want to succumb to that. So, my husband, I played sports, my husband played college football, we both just know, that it's her own path, and, neither one of us is playing professional sports now. So I want to think about other things than just sports and being healthy. So we just try not to, I'm sure there's people who disagree with us. I'm sure there's a lot of people who see this from a different perspective, and that's okay. That's just not my perspective.
One of the things that often happens when we get older is we forget about what happened when we were younger, or we embellish on it. Thinking back for when you played youth sports, is there anything you wish you had done differently growing up through? Yeah,
I think in high school I whittled down to 1, and I had played 3. By my senior year, I was only playing 1. I wish I'd stayed with all 3.
How much of positive feedback have you gotten from other people in the Bethel Park community with bringing this coaching in? I know that you can't bring it in as one person, other people have to be involved, but it's often an instance of, well, this is the way we've always done it, and it's worked just fine, so why do we want to rock the boat?
We have both. So I have some people who, we talk about creating younger, they like to hear when you're talking about, one of our big things is to get some better younger programs and have quality programs. So we still want to teach sports and have it quality, because that will create, we know when you look at these things, the way you treat athletes, you do make better athletes. It's not just about, getting kids involved. You also make them better athletes. So people are really behind on that stuff, but there's also this pushback on what do you mean you're not yelling at them? What do you mean you're not running them for punishment? And, there's always that old school way, this is how my coach taught me. But my one, I think the positive feedback that I needed was this year, my other daughter's basketball team, which my husband and I coached together, we struggled because they were all really beginner players, and we played in the area, and we were, we only won a few games, and they had probably the best season ever. They got so much better. They bonded as a team, and the parent feedback was unbelievable, thanking us like for like building confidence in their kids and like showing them the love of the sport. And we had, just for fun, we had a 2-on-2 tournament at the end of the season that anybody could come to, and we got 100% participation rate. And I think the biggest compliment of all is when you have a team that maybe isn't the top team winning every single game, and you get 100% kids that come back, then you're on the right track. And so I think our feedback from our parents was this was awesome, and we weren't winning most of our games yet because we're young and we have them coming back. That's where I want to be as a coach, and I think that's what we should be striving for, not necessarily blowing out teams by 50 points. That doesn't need to be our goal.
I'm curious with Project Play, we know when you get to a high school level, just because of high schools, there's a limited number of positions. Does Project Play do anything to help those athletes transition from rec sports to, okay, I'm not good enough for high school, but I still want to be active and do things? Because I know even at a higher level, one of the concerns for college athletes, professional athletes, their image is, I'm an athlete, and suddenly they retire or they finish their eligibility and I'm done. That can happen when you're 12 or 13.
Yeah, so they have a school sports playbook as well, and that is actually their new focus for this upcoming is to get more high school kids back, because that's really where we lose the kids, especially as in high school. So the goal is to not only, the goal is not to get rid of competitive sports. It's to support both the recreational athlete and the competitive athlete. So we lose a lot of the recreational athletes. So to bring things like intramurals and student-led sports, and also to re-examine what we think of as sport. So adding activities like, the number one thing kids wanted was archery, or believe it or not, the fastest growing sport is pickleball. So could we get those in schools just to get kids going? And then also working with PE teachers and health teachers to create, I believe they call them individual activity plans, so the kid has the chance to have a plan for being active for their whole life, instead of just doing traditional PE. Like how can you, finding what they like to stay active for their whole life. So those are all just some of the things they're starting to work with to try to get more high school age kids doing more sports.
It's interesting, the comment about the PE teachers. I know my dad went to Colgate University in the 1950s, and there was a requirement that all students there take 4 semesters of what they termed lifetime sports, tennis, golf. They actually had a ski hill on the campus. And I think that's something that maybe high schools need to initiate, and maybe even colleges bringing back. It's even though it's just PE, and I can say that because I was a PE major, maybe we need to make movement more of a norm rather than an abnorm if you're not athletic.
There definitely needs to be a revamping of our PE structure in most schools to support this, because that's where a lot of kids get all of their physical activity, especially people without the financial resources, because sports is getting so expensive that you're pricing out the people that don't have it. So schools are like the main access right now, and kids aren't playing outside, so it really has to be. So there needs to be a change in the PE structure to make it, all the way up. And by high school, I think less than 20% of kids get PE, especially by their senior year. So if they're not playing a sport, they're not getting it in school, and they don't have role models at home, they're not going to learn it,
We've been talking to Kelly Kuhn. She is a physical therapist and involved with Project Play. She's with the Bethel Park Recs Department, volunteer position, I know. So check that out. Check out Project Play through the Aspen Institute. And Kelly, once again, thanks for joining Movement is a Lifestyle.
Thanks for having me.